Europa Universalis 5 is rapidly approaching release, and before it comes out, I want to make an impressions video from the perspective of someone with a measly 2,800 hours in EU4. I'm primarily a Crusader Kings 3 and Victoria 3 player, with EU4 being in third place on my list of favorite Paradox games. Hey, that'd be a fun video to make sometime. Anyway, EU5, when I first heard of it, I assumed would be a lot like EU4, and in many ways it is. I avoided a lot of the dev diary content, not for lack of interest in the game, but because I feared kind of ruining it for myself before getting my hands on it. From what I heard, the game had an economy with pops, and it was an extremely detailed world. It sounded like some kind of mashup of Victoria 3 and Europa Universalis 4, which certainly sounded promising. I went into the game expecting something like that, and after playing 69 hours, I can firmly say that EU5 is significantly different from both games, really. EU5 has pops, like Victoria 3, it has movable standing armies, like EU4, it has antagonism, which is basically aggressive expansion, like EU4, it has markets and goods with changing prices based on an equilibrium of demand and supply, like Victoria 3. Nonetheless, the game actually carries significantly more relation to Imperator Rome, in my opinion, than either of the games. It even in one aspect borrows from Hearts of Iron 4, at least in my opinion. I'm going to expand on those comparisons in a moment here, but before I do, I should mention that being only 69 hours into the game, I don't have the most experience with it. Classic Paradox grand strategy joke, 69 hours just completing the tutorial type thing, and I've got to say, yeah, I feel like I've only just started to really get the game after this many hours. With that said, my thoughts and opinions are subject to significant change because the game will be different on release than it is right now, and because even after 69 hours, there is still much to learn and uncover. I also should add that I'm not allowed to show any EU5 footage that isn't already public, so that means this video's visual aspect will be footage from whatever game we're discussing in comparison rather than any EU5 footage. In order to organize my impressions, I want to cut this video into chapters based on what other Paradox game that EU5 compares to. So essentially, a Victoria 3 section, an EU4 section, an Imperator section, a Hearts of Iron section, and even a Crusader Kings section, because yes, even CK2 or 3 can be compared to EU5 if you ask me. The lion's share of this video is about EU5's comparison to Victoria 3 and EU4, but I'll include the other games just for completion's sake, I suppose. With that, let's begin with the Victoria 3 comparison, since to me, the economy is the most obviously new feature of EU5. EU5's economic systems, I think, can be best summarized as an arcadey version of Victoria 3's economics. In Victoria 3, money is generated through buildings that can buy and sell goods, and every dollar is accounted for, whether it be the cost of buying guns for an army, or the extra sales of paper for a new university. Every single bit of cash ends up either in a capitalist's hands, in a business's cash reserves, in the government's gold reserves, or in the hands of a pop as a wage, which they then spend. Victoria 3 makes a few assumptions about human behavior to make that happen, such as assuming that no pop will ever hoard money, and that money cannot be inflated or deflated in value, and so on. In this sense, Victoria 3 is a very tight and meticulous game. I know people have a lot of misgivings about it, but if there's anything to praise Victoria 3 for, it's that its economy is ridiculously detailed. Europa Universalis 5 is not like that. EU5 is the significantly more just whatever economic system. There are no wages, there are just input and output goods. There's also a whole lot of magic money, and that's best represented through the government buildings. Most buildings which give manpower, like armories for example, require weapons as an input good, but so as to not make the game horrifically painful, the armory will only ask that the government, that's you and your income, pay 20% of the cost of the input goods while still consuming 100% of the input goods that it's asking for. That's a magic 80% of the input goods being purchased from the weapons workshops with magic money that doesn't exist. That of course is fine, at least for me, because EU5 isn't trying to be Victoria 3, it's not trying to be a proper economic simulation. It's trying to have a semblance of balance, and in return for that, magic money must be created. I get it. It's also simpler with regards to taxes. All buildings are owned by one of a handful of estates, and you tax a percentage of the estate's income with a slider that you set. Most of the good stuff is owned by the burghers, so you tax the burghers a lot. Most of your population is a bunch of peasant commoners, so despite their extremely small profits, their immense size compared to the burghers puts them in a similar running with regards to income. The nobles pay taxes too, but they don't tend to make a ton of money. Instead, their role is to make demand for the stuff the burghers make. All that fine cloth you're making? Who's buying it? It's the nobles in your market. The nobles indirectly make you richer by their demand for goods, but directly don't tend to generate huge taxes. To give you an idea of how much nobles consume, the base demand for fine cloth for a noble pop is 0.2. That's for one noble. For a burgher, the base demand on fine cloth is 0.025, a little bit more than 10%. To me, it was a pretty quick gameplay loop to figure out. The nobles in the nation across your market are like your upper bound of consumption, so you can produce as many goods as you have nobles to consume them, plus your ability to export goods to other nobles in other markets, which we'll talk about soon. Your peasants produce the raw materials that your burghers can buy to make their goods. Peasants can promote to being burghers or nobles depending on your values, and they'll promote at different speeds depending on stuff like having a university and your stability and other such stats. Pop promotion is much simpler and it's inevitable in EU5. The only thing you influence is how many pops each month promote. There are only really 3 qualifications in the game: nobles, burghers, and clergymen. Technically, peasants can promote to laborers, but laborers are also part of the lower class, so the only difference is whether or not they produce some kind of subsistence income for themselves or work a job at a building, except for a handful of buildings which do employ peasants, but I digress. The point is, there's no qualifications or division of classes into other sorts of jobs. There's also a compression of what standard of living represents. In EU5, pops have a satisfaction number from 0 to 100. The satisfaction number is increased if the goods that pops consume are low in price. They don't consume more of them to account for the low price like in Victoria 3. There's no scaling up of standard of living, nor are there wages that can be based on such a concept, so your incentive to make a consumer economy is just for satisfaction. A noble will always demand the same amount of stuff no matter how fat and rich the nobles get. Instead, you drive up consumption purely by getting more pops. That aside, my main point of impression with regards to EU5's relation to Victoria 3, at least economically speaking, is a simplified arcadey system. That includes stuff like trade. In Victoria 3, trade centers generate profits for their owners, as expected, and then that income can be reinvested via the investment pool, or be taxed, or spent on goods, and so on. In EU5, trade profits just go right into the budget as trade income. Again, simple, to the point, arcadey. Trade is a system by which supply is transferred to another market, and the difference in price multiplied by the number of goods makes money, with a small consideration for the cost of logistics on the trade route. In EU5, your options with regards to protectionism are much lower, beyond simply embargoing the nations you want to stop influencing your market. There are neither tariffs nor subventions. EU5 does feature other ways to influence trade though, such as using your fleet to increase naval presence, which gives trade advantage. This is essentially what protecting trade was back in EU4, as you set your fleet to patrol the sea routes that cover whatever trades you're doing. Ultimately, I elected to automate my trade pretty often in EU5, mostly because it's got that problem that Victoria 3 before the trade center rework came to be. Trade is constantly changing and your routes will invalidate and reactivate, and it's be really annoying and micro-intensive to keep going. Doubly unfortunately, at least on the patches I've been playing on, the automatic trading AI is absolutely awful, and in the early game much of your income will come from trade until you get enough buildings going that you can rely on taxes. The trade AI was especially broken when I first got my hands on the game, as the AI didn't do any imports, only exports, so every nation was only exporting its goods. That means that certain markets which lacked essential goods would, without player intervention, have to pray that another nation would conveniently send an export of what they needed instead of explicitly making an import route. Pretty sure that's now fixed on the patch that I have, but the point is that although trade is automatable, it is very bad to do so in comparison to doing it yourself. I want to circle back a little bit and talk about investment pool. In Victoria 3, the main driver of most economies is the private investment pool, which is fueled by the excess profits of the ownership class of a nation. In EU5, there is a very small bit of private investment in that estates make money and use that money to create things. The difference is that the buildings they build are often unique to them and can't be built by the player. For example, the nobles might build toll castles or something named like that, I forget its name, but essentially a building whose only outputs are to increase the noble estate's power in that state. I haven't actually checked if those buildings have any inputs, but if they don't, then they essentially do nothing for the economy besides empower an estate. That's really cool if you ask me, since there are ways to destroy those buildings via the parliament, which is more of a topic in comparison for EU4. Back to the investment pool, only really do the burghers make buildings that you would actually want to see built, and sometimes the clergy do too. Private investment is a very small part of the economy, at least in my experience, and so a low tax strategy would probably be dead in the water. EU5 is a significantly more extractive game than Victoria 3. It's entirely unviable to run a debt-based economy in EU5 compared to Victoria 3, where it's in fact the norm and the meta for any recognized nation. The last thing I want to talk about with regards to economics is the level of money deletion in EU5. If you haven't played Victoria 3, then you might not be aware of what money deletion is, but essentially, at certain points in Victoria 3, money can vanish from the economy. The most blatant example is from government dividend efficiency. Let's say a business generates £1,000 of profit, but it's government owned and the government dividend efficiency is 50%. The government gets £500 and the other £500 are simply disintegrated, as if they never existed. No pop gets it, no cash reserves, no investment pool, no nothing. In Victoria 3, there are very few money deletion events, but in EU5, they're everywhere. The cost of raising stability does not purchase any goods. The cost of the court has no goods, and fort maintenance doesn't consume any goods. Those sliders simply destroy money. When you pay 10 gold to fort maintenance, no masonry or lumber was purchased, the money is just gone. Of course, in a more arcadey system like EU5, there's not so much of a worry about that, but it does mean that while in Victoria 3, war actively stimulates the economy, in EU5, wars in your market don't change the economy very much. If you're playing in the Cologne market and the HRE erupts into war, you won't see goods changing in price because everyone's raising their maintenance. For that reason, economies are very stable in EU5 except for food. When armies are raised, they stockpile food into themselves to use for supply. That will shock the price of food, as for a moment prices skyrocket to account for the new demand, and then within a few months settle down again. Markets have food stockpiles though, and in most cases the stockpile of food in the market will cover the surge of demand from war. In cases where it doesn't though, well, get ready to import some food. So with that, I think I've explained the key differences in economics of Victoria 3 and EU5, and when it comes to how I feel about them, it's natural for me to grumble about a less detailed system, but at the same time, I found it refreshing to have this more chill, more arcadey, and more direct system. In Victoria 3, you can have a building with huge profits, and you might only see a benefit from it because its owners contribute to your investment pool, which lets you make more buildings, and it's all very much so covered in layers of consequences. In EU5, a high profit building contributes money to an estate, and you tax the estate's income a percentage based on your sliders. Boom. Profits create direct, into your monthly balance income. There's something nice about that simplicity. I like the EU5 systems only because of the kind of game EU5 is. It's not Victoria 3, so its economic shortcomings aren't actually a problem. The issue that I think will come up is the weird balancing. There's a curious upward spiral of consumption when it comes to government buildings. I mentioned earlier that armories, for example, consume 100% of their shown input goods, but the government only pays for 20% of them. The other 80% is just magically paid for from nothing. Well, the weapon workshops that make the goods that armories demand are still profitable enterprises owned by the burghers. If you tax the burghers enough, it's possible that you can build armories which are meant to cost your budget each month, and via the magic demand they generate, end up with more money each month than what you're paying to keep those buildings around. Nonetheless, it won't feel like that's what you're doing. When you look at your expenses, it'll just say building expenses, armory, minus 20 ducats, or something like that. And yet, if you were to look into all your weapons workshops, you'd see that they're significantly more profitable because of all the demand in your market being generated by the armories. You'd realize that these armories are actively paying you. This is why magical money from thin air can be a problem, and right now I absolutely predict an EU5 strategy where you stack enough tax efficiency and burgher tax to make a military-industrial complex which actively creates money by consuming weapons. And here's the thing, that sounds great to me. I mean, you're limited by the building cap, so you'd eventually run out of places to build armories based on your population in the places you're building them, so it is limited by your population eventually, but I don't know, I kinda like this arcadey nature. I didn't even talk about it, but tax efficiency just straight up generates money from nothing. If you have 20% tax efficiency and you tax, let's say, 10 ducats from the burghers, you'll actually receive 12 ducats in your income, but the burghers will still only lose 10. That's just 2 free ducats from the void brought into existence. That sounds bad, but it's kind of a power trip in many ways. EU5 handwaves the complexity of the economy in return for fun modifier stacking, and that's where I'd like to transition to the EU4 comparison phase here, as modifier stacking really is the name of the game with regards to classic EU4. EU4 is a game all about modifiers and bonuses, and additive multipliers that take you to ridiculous places. EU4 has always been a game about becoming powerful through the intelligent choices that you make with regards to your build. It's a game which doesn't demand that you pre-plan everything and know what modifiers to stack, but one which rewards it when you do. If you want a discipline stack, you play Brandenburg into Prussia or something. I don't know, I stopped following EU4's meta years ago, maybe that's old. The point is that modifier stacking is the DNA of Europa Universalis as a franchise, if you ask me, although I haven't played EU3 or anything, so maybe it's different, but regardless, EU5 handles modifier stacking a little bit differently. There aren't any national ideas or idea groups to choose from in EU5. Instead, it goes the Imperator route of having this big tech tree, and you sort of define the ethos of your play by what parts of the tech tree you go down. Most nations have special techs unique to them, and that can sort of act as your national ideas maybe. For For example, Italian nations get a tech that gives them 20% production efficiency on fine cloth, meaning that if you want to do a fine cloth build, you should probably play in Italy. I think Flanders has a similar unique tech, but I certainly haven't browsed enough of the nations in the game to know off the top of my head what nations are best suited to what. Now, here's a point of friction that I think will immediately rub all the EU4 players the wrong way. It's not immediately obvious what a nation is good at because they don't have national ideas. In EU4, it's obvious that England is a naval nation because of their national ideas, which are visible at a glance. In EU5, you'll have to check England's advancements, their unique technologies, to see that they're a naval power, and even then, you might not get those advancements for a while. For example, the Dutch unlock polders later in the game, which help to offset the development penalties in wetlands. There's another advancement they start the game with though, which gives them 5% production efficiency on all buildings for the whole game. Now, I'll be honest with you, I had no idea they started with that advancement until someone else told me in the content creator EU5 Discord. What I'm saying with this is that EU4's national idea system is still in the game, it's just that it's more hidden away. In terms of idea groups from EU4, they're sort of here. During each era, you pick a set of advancements you want to make available, and those get added into the base advancement tree. That's kind of like picking an idea group, I suppose, but more what corresponds to an idea group in EU5 is simply your choice of where in the tech tree to go. If you know you don't care about the Navy, then just never take any advancements for the Navy. The weird thing about this is that it means you can essentially tech switch with way too much ease. Oh, did you never research a single ship technology the whole game and suddenly need ships for your new overseas empire? Well, just research the newest ship tech for the most up-to-date ship and start building it. In my Holland game, I never researched barks, the first light ship in the game, because I was more focused on the conquest of the Netherlands and Westphalia. Well, once I started making moves for England, I just researched frigates or whatever the newest light ship was, and now I have the most modern navy available. It reminds me of something like Humankind, if you remember that game. In Humankind, you can take a very militaristic civilization, and in one era change to one that's totally focused on diplomacy, and suddenly, you're specialized in diplomacy now. It's a little jarring, I can feel off. That being said, the intermediary techs between ship types tend to be things like 5% ship morale or navy upkeep down and stuff like that. Little modifiers which, on their own, don't mean much, but if you've been investing in the naval aspects of each era's advancement trees, those will add up into making your navy better than other navies in the game, akin to taking naval ideas in EU4. That can help lessen the whiplash, but to be clear, most of the power for navies and armies is in getting new units. No matter how many diminutive morale bonuses an army has picked up, if they're an era behind by unit type, they will get destroyed. I mentioned it earlier, and I want to harp on it a little bit, EU5 has a content transparency problem. After 69 hours of play, I sort of figured out this dynamic by intuition, but because it's not very obvious or told to you, it can feel like EU5 has taken the diversity of nations in EU4 and flattened them out to be more like Victoria 3. In Victoria 3, most nations play the same, for better or worse. I want to be clear that in EU5, nations play a lot more like in EU4 than in Victoria 3, where the modifiers you can stack are based on what's available to those nations in the form of ideas, now rebranded as unique advancements and government reforms or random events and other little things. Beyond that, EU5 does feel quite a bit more different from EU4 in that playing tall is a whole lot more complicated. In EU4, playing tall is as simple as watching numbers go up and clicking the development button. Well, EU5 playing tall is mostly sitting and watching, but you can put a whole lot more effort into the minutiae of playing tall. You can optimize your trade routes, you have to decide what buildings to make and what will maximize your playing tall power, your ability to balance estate power and crime power is way more restricted than in EU4, so you'll really want to be careful about how many estate privileges you give out, and the parliament is extremely impactful. Playing tall in EU5 is something of a must, as playing wide is not nearly as rewarding as it once was. In EU4, conquering a province saw an immediate reward in that although the autonomy was high, the base tax and base production were already benefiting you. Then you core it, you lower the autonomy, you kill the rebels, and that province is contributing to your budget, manpower, sailors, force limit, everything. Well, now we have this cute little expense called the cost of court. The cost of court is an arbitrary expense which determines your legitimacy or republican tradition or whatever other resource theocracies might use. If you don't keep the slider on your cost of court expenses high, you'll lose legitimacy, and that will make stability more expensive. With lower stability, which is also a slider that you pick in your expenses, you will lose estate loyalty, and thus estate taxes, and eventually deal with estate rebellions. Now here's the thing. Cost of court, and by extension, cost of stability, is determined by the size of your nation. That means that if you're conquering locations that you can't really get any control in, and thus you can't tax them, you may be actively reducing your income and destabilizing your nation. But here's the kicker. Isn't that basically a form of overextension? If you don't take the time to build up the roads to your new conquests, integrate them, assimilate them, convert them, and get cores on them and so on, then the rising cost of the core will be outscaling the bonus of having those locations, just like the negative impacts of overextension from EU4. See, once again, this issue is information transparency. To a new player, this will feel frustrating. I'm being punished for conquering, what is this crap? Is a vibe I can totally see coming from the EU4 people, which might not be expressed by the Victoria 3 crowd. Meanwhile, this is actually an extremely similar system to overextension from EU4, except it's been masked by more complexity. To be clear, in EU5, conquering more land is good, and gaining more territory is a valuable thing. I've never really found myself thinking, I'd be conquering but it wouldn't help me get more powerful. It would often be something more like, the money I could spend on army maintenance, court costs, and stability costs to conquer isn't as well spent right now as it otherwise could be on a few more fine cloth guilds. And the difference between those two lines of thought is, to me, extremely important. In EU4, the alternative to gaining power if you didn't want to do conquest was the extremely mind-numbing process of playing tall. You click dev buttons, you lower autonomy, and you stack all the right development modifiers to make it efficient, and even then, you'd always be outpaced by someone playing wide. EU5 answers that problem by making playing tall sometimes more beneficial than playing wide, and giving it a gameplay loop that makes it worthy of your attention. To summarize, a world conquest in EU4 is actually optimal if you don't break the rebels in the process. In EU5, it would only be optimal in a sparse few cases, but it's still a path forward nonetheless. Anyway, the last comparison to EU4 I want to draw is in regards to tag switching. It's absolutely alive and well here, especially because unlike in EU4, you essentially get to keep your national ideas from your previous tag when you tag switch. What do I mean? Well, if you're playing Holland, and you researched polders and then tag switch to Great Britain, which I've done, it's super fun, then you keep the polders advancement and you get all the new Great Britain stuff added to your tree. Here's the limiting factor. Every tag is on a 1 to 4 tier system, and most of the good tags are tier 3. So for example, Britain is tier 3, the Netherlands is tier 2, and Germany is tier 4. That means that if I want to go down a tag switching bonanza as Holland, I can form the Netherlands, then Britain, then Germany, but at that point I'm done. Maybe there's an exception for the HRE, Rome, and the Mongols like was in EU4, but I haven't checked that. Anyway, the point is that tag switching is more powerful, but you can't go down a tier. So if there's another tier 3 tag you want, like say Italy, then you can't form that, and Great Britain. You'll have to pick one. I really like this system, and for the people who really want to tag switch a ton, just add a game rule or mod that takes away the tier system and everyone gets to be happy. There is one little thing about tag switching that can make it painful, and that's that to switch, your capital has to be in the region that tag is in. So as Holland, I had to move my capital to anywhere in Britain to be able to form Britain. Not a huge deal, but moving your capital is expensive, and I could see it being a pain. Beyond that, I find this to be a great system. It definitely does contribute to EU5's arcadey feel. Obviously, you can limit yourself and play a more grounded game, but I mean, if you really want to stack up bonuses to fine cloth, let's say, then play Flanders, who starts the game with a bonus to fine cloth production, then go tag switch to Italy and get their advancement for a bonus to fine cloth, and then I bet out there somewhere, there's some tier 4 tag with a bonus to fine cloth you can find, but I don't know off the top of my head. Despite the heap of praise I've put up here with regards to the obfuscation of ideas and other such mechanics, it does result in a heap of content for the nations that get it, and then a total drought for those without any. For example, the tag of Perm has 0 unique content whatsoever. It's essentially equivalent to a nation with the generic ideas from EU4. The thing is that at least national ideas were like, kind of okay. Now you get nothing. Honestly though, a small issue only for those who want to play the most obscure of tags, something which will likely be fixed by DLCs. And hey, for those of you who don't like the DLC cop-out, I want to be clear that I don't like it either, but it's the truth. If you really want to play Perm, which I understand because they have a unique Komi pagan faith, then you're probably going to want to wait for the big Ural Mountain flavor pack or something. Could you imagine if they actually have something planned for the Arctic Circle nations? They're pretty cool. Anyway, that's the EU4 comparison. To summarize, it has a lot of the same systems, but they've been obfuscated by complexity, and that is, to me, a good thing, but it means that the game can be frustrating to learn. It can make you feel like it's something that it's not. This game is very much so the patrician's game, in the sense that it will take a very high IQ to see through its obfuscation. I'm memeing, but I kinda mean it. Cost of court is perhaps one of the most insidious expenses I've ever seen, as you won't even realize how important it is until you're, I guess, 69 hours in. I made a joke to Lemon Cake, who has by now played hundreds of hours of the game, that rebellions are a good thing because they cut your costs of court when the rebels steal your locations. And his response, I'm pretty sure, was ironic, but he's right. I am cooking. If you lose a bunch of locations that only contribute to your cost of court without giving much tax base, then yeah, it is good to lose that land. Shout out Lemon Cake, by the way, it's been lots of fun to talk about EU5 with. Same goes to Generalist, who has been the only person nerdy enough to sit and talk with me about EU5's economics. Us Victoria 3 bros gotta stick together. Show them some love for more EU5 and other Paradox content. Anyway, let's move on to a comparison to Crusader Kings 3. This will be a much shorter section, given the comparison between EU5 and Crusader Kings 3 is much smaller. Characters. Victoria 3 has them, Crusader Kings 3 has them, EU4 has them, even Hearts of Iron 4 has them, but of course, CK3 has a total monopoly on the mechanics oriented around characters. In EU5, the importance of individual characters of interest, or courtiers as they're called, has been significantly elevated by the cabinet system. Family is very important in EU5 because of how cabinet members influence the estates. Every courtier is a member of an estate, but your family members are part of the crown, or the republic, or I guess the theocracy in some cases, estate. You want your crown estate to be powerful because having crown power is like having crown land in EU4 or having tax collection in Victoria 3. It's only a good thing to have more crown power unless you're sacrificing the potential estate privileges you could be giving out by hoarding your crown power, similarly to how it's bad in EU4 not to sell crown land if you don't really benefit from the bonus crown land very much. Anyway, characters. It's very important to fill out your cabinet with crown members in EU5 if you ask me, because early on one of the best force multipliers for your economy is to get your trade income up. Guess what number directly impacts your trade income? That's right, crown power. That means that you'll want your ruler to get married and have kids, and to raise those kids to be competent so they can serve in the cabinet. The cabinet acts a lot like your council in CK3, except a whole lot more numerical. In CK3, your steward makes more money by merit of just being the steward, and that means you don't necessarily want to give out the steward role to someone that doesn't like you, since you'll be empowering them. In practice, CK3's AI isn't competent enough for that to really matter very much, but I digress, that's another topic for another video. In EU5, you might want to be meritocratic and give out a cabinet spot to the most competent courtier. Maybe that's a noble or a burgher, but, well, you'll be empowering that estate significantly if you do that. The cabinet is worth 25% power in total, with each slot on the cabinet having the power it contributes divided equally. That means that with 4 cabinet spots, each spot will contribute about 6.25 power to their estate of choice. These multipliers are all additive, by the way, and since the number of multipliers on your crown power is very small compared to the multipliers on your estates who get a ton from their privileges, each cabinet member that's from the crown is a huge asset. One bonus the Ottomans have in EU5 is that on game start, the Sultan has a bunch of brothers with high stats, and those high stats make them great cabinet members, and because of the Sultan's brothers, they actively increase your crown power. This gives the Ottomans a pretty explosive start, as they don't have to spend much time nurturing up a family of cabinet members that can help them to integrate, assimilate, and convert their new conquests. The cabinet is, in many ways, actually what I'd love to see in Crusader Kings 3, a group of power holders that, through their skills, significantly impact the nation. In EU5, you really feel it if you have a low-skill cabinet. In CK3, you could leave all the advisors except the chaplain, since he controls your temples, empty, and you'd barely notice. The big, huge, actually awful flaw with this whole crown estate system is that only family can be part of the crown estate. So brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, uncles, aunts, etc. That's fine for monarchies, but for republics this effectively means that once you've churned through the characters at the start of the game, you're out of crown members. I played as Florence a few times, and I actually really enjoyed checking if the lord I wanted to elect had any family as part of calculations on who to elect. It's no longer just about checking stats and then picking the highest number. A lower stat guy with 3 brothers that can join the cabinet is better than a higher stat guy in many cases. The thing is, republics can't arrange marriages at all of any type. The de Medicis of Florence died out within 2 generations because the historical characters plopped in there didn't get married and didn't have kids. That meant that by about the 1390s or so, I was electing a bunch of randomly generated characters that had no family, and I was seriously inhibited by the lack of a supportive family, nor could I make one due to the inability to do any marriages. The answer is either to allow Republican governments to at least do local marriages so they can just marry each other and produce families, or to extend the position of the crown estate from just family to family and loyalists. Maybe a character could approach another character and make a bond, like a friendship perhaps, and the character could become a member of the crown estate. In so doing, that would make republics into a fun little web of alliances. You know what, this is a good idea. I'm gonna leave a feedback ticket to Paradox. Back on topic though, yes, characters are more impactful in this game, and you'll want to get them married and having kids and stuff so that you can have a larger pool of talent to put in your cabinet. The cabinet is very important, although in some ways their loyalties are more important than their skills, depending on what stage of the game you're in. Anyway, that's about it. Beyond that, you've got royal marriages to make unions and stuff, but unions are kind of weird and buggy in the current early access patch. You have fewer options to influence succession in EU5, is one big divergence from CK3. For example, I don't think you're able to assassinate someone to try and get a different heir on the throne. Of course, you can get a claimed throne CB pretty easily, so if you really want a union and are okay with some war, just force it to happen. Let's talk, very briefly, about Hearts of Iron 4, since I do think there's a little influence from that game here in EU5. Anyone that's played HOI4 knows the game has essentially two phases. The build up to war, where you put down civilian factories and military factories, do some focuses, get your tech and designer divisions and so on. Then there's the war phase, where you actually play the game. EU4 has that kind of vibe in the beginning. Now that doesn't mean you can't do any war right in 1337, but rather that you won't likely want to. The first, I'd say, about 20 years of the game for most tags is going to be spent on building up a basic enough economy to get a snowball rolling so you can go to war. You totally can go conquering right in the first year of the game, but it just won't be very worthwhile depending on the situation. Even as the Ottomans, I liked to wait just a moment before going hard, and this is especially true since one of the Ottomans' unique government reforms that reduces their antagonism generation, which is fancy speak for aggressive expansion, doesn't kick in for a few years. The game very clearly wants you to spend at least maybe, 5 or 10 years just building up a little bit, and it's somewhat reminiscent of HOI4. You take those early years to decide on your build, to leverage your advantages, to play the diplomatic game, and maybe find some allies that you can use to gang up on someone with some locations you want. In EU4, there are a ton of strategies, which are very effective I should add, that involve declaring war on the very first day that you can, which is 1 month after the game begins. EU5 is much slower paced in that sense. I think it's an intentional choice to have the game feel that way. I think Paradox really wanted players to look at EU5 as a holistic grand strategy game instead of a war game, which EU4 really is. EU4's systems are all geared around war, and in some ways EU5's is too, but EU5 is significantly more of a game that you can play as a real pacifist if you wanted to, although I think that'd be an underuse of its systems, unlike Victoria 3. Victoria 3 War could be ripped out of the game entirely, and it'd still be a pretty similar game to what it is now. The other thing that EU5 makes use of, which is kind of, maybe, if you stretch the logic like HOI4, is situations. Situations are these scripted sets of events and modifiers that apply to nations and give them options. Things like the 100 Years' War and the Guelph and Ghibelline conflict in Italy are situations. Some situations have more going on than others, like the Ottomans have a situation that can let them get some quick CBs on the other Turkish beyliks, and it gives them bonuses for conquering important Seljuk sites, like the Seljuk coin mints in Sivas and Konya. These are reminiscent to me of focus trees in a very vague sense. These aren't nearly as railroaded as focuses are, but they act as guardrails that help encourage historical outcomes. They lack the permanence of EU4's mission trees, in the sense that situations can end and then life goes on, and some nations, in fact many nations, have no situations at all, but they have that HOI4 impact of sort of guiding the game towards certain events. No matter what happens, England and France will enter the 100 Years' War. France and the Pope will fight over Avignon, and the Ottomans will begin their conquest of Anatolia because of these situations. The problem right now is that situations are very unreliable and tend not to push the AI hard enough towards certain historical outcomes. I've only very rarely seen the Ottomans conquer Constantinople before 1500, and in many cases I've never seen them conquer it at all, and that's because their situation isn't enough of a pushing force for the AI to really get its ass into gear and become the menace of the Near East that the Ottomans ought to be. Anyway, like I said, this section is very short, and that's because there really isn't much comparison to be had between EU5 and HOI4. For one last comparison, I want to talk about EU5's relationship to Imperator, which is also relatively loose. The thing about comparing Imperator to EU5 is that the similarity is something you feel as you play, rather than something easily detectable and explainable. EU5 has roads, Imperator has roads. EU5 has buildings that you build multiple of, and which are really important, Imperator has those too. EU5 has a system of army composition, albeit a bare bones one, and Imperator has one too, albeit much more complicated than the EU5's. It's hard to point to exactly what it is, but the extremely large tech tree, which you're not meant to fully research, the focus on buildings and pops, the road building, and the relative simplicity of trade make EU5 feel like Imperator sometimes. In Imperator, conquering more land wasn't always the best choice, as you only really got power from either making a ton of slaves who were likely to revolt on you, or from accepting the culture in the region you conquered for a quick boost of strength, or from assimilating new conquests to your culture, which could take a very long time, but had no penalties. Well, in EU5, I often found myself massively power spiking when I accepted a new culture, like in my Holland game where I conquered much of Westphalia. Accepting the Westphalians saw my levy count skyrocket, just like what happens in Imperator if you immediately accept, say, the Etruscans after conquering them. Short-term, huge power gain, but assimilating is better in the long run. I think it's the tech tree that most makes the game feel like Imperator. There are mission trees in EU5, but they're a pretty sorry state, at least in the early access patch, so I've been ignoring them. They can be useful, as the rewards on some of the missions can help a lot with your values and stuff, but beyond that, I find myself often being frustrated at how weird they are. I suspect the missions will see a significantly stronger showing for the release patch though. It's hard elsewise to explain why EU5 feels like Imperator. It just has the same gameplay loop, it feels like, with its focus on pops. Victoria 3 also uses pops, but it uses them differently and more dynamically than EU4 or Imperator. I think it's the way that you accept cultures, assimilate populations, and focus on demographics that really pull it towards that Imperator vibe. I find myself making the same decisions as I would with Imperator, where I'm looking at cultures and thinking, will I be conquering enough of those pops to make accepting them worth it? And in EU4, you do a similar thought process, except it's not very often that you'd culture convert, whereas conquest in EU5 is significantly more focused on assimilation over the course of the game. This is expressed by the fact that you can only have a core on a place that has a majority your culture or an accepted culture and your faith. Anyway, with that, the Imperator comparison ends. It's a vibe, it's a style, it's a thought process. Imperator feels like EU5 in that sense. Real quick now, I want to talk about my overall thoughts on EU5, having played it for 69 hours. Definitely not a review or anything like that, more just some of my initial joys and initial concerns. Oh, but before we get to that, we can't forget about the greatest Paradox game out there, March of the Eagles. Naturally, the two games are like mirror images of one another, thanks to the presence of units on the map and, of course, their sharing of a timeline to a small extent. Basically, EU5 would better be called March of the Eagles 2. Back to the overall thoughts section. Europa Universalis 5 is a game which harkens back to an era of Paradox that I think many people have been clamoring for. EU5 is a very complex game in its totality, while being a little less complicated in each individual aspect when compared to its contemporaries. It's a game which really doesn't explain much to you, as it does have a tutorial, but the tutorial doesn't really explain a lot about what you ought to be doing. The tutorial won't tell you how important crown power is. It won't tell you that nobles consume 10 times as much fine cloth and other such important pieces of information. It's something which you intuit through problem solving. You notice that your income is terrible, so you look for ways to fix it. You check your tax efficiency and trade income maybe, you see that they're influenced by your crown power, and then you think to increase your crown power, but of course you don't know how to do that. You realize that cabinet members increase the power of the estate they're from, and then you guess that a guy from the crown estate will increase your crown power. You even think to make one of them your head of cabinet, and it turns out that that too increases the crown power. I figured that out after abandoning like 2 runs to a tax death spiral that I couldn't figure out how to solve, and after figuring it out, my game was suddenly so much more fun, and that's because I went from being lost to having some plans of attack. The game does have a pretty robust hint system, however, and look, I'm a zoomer, okay? I found myself being way too zoomer-brained to read the hints. I would skim them maybe at most, then just think, nah, I'll just click things until they work, and in many ways, I found that to work pretty well. The nested tooltip system, which I believe was first introduced in CK3 actually, makes its triumphant return in EU5, and it's a real blessing. I was able to figure out a whole lot in the game by just reading the much shorter tooltips and then mousing over things. For example, the consumption that nobles have, I learned about by just looking at the numbers. Rather than having a hint maybe imply to me that nobles consume goods, I looked at the numbers and found the demand for goods there. I suppose I just like to see numbers instead of being told some ideas as hints. I find that EU5 is extremely satisfying once you do understand the numbers, but at first can be very confusing. You'll find things happening to you and you won't get it. The truth is, you learn to plan ahead after your first couple attempts at playing. You learn that food will become an issue as the game goes on because you'll be pulling peasants into pop groups that consume more food, so you need to build more than what you might expect. You'll learn what sort of techs you're interested in and which ones are a waste of time for you to build. When I first started playing EU5, it reminded me of the days when I was a teenager just playing Crusader Kings 2 for the first time. I got into the game via a Northern Lion video where he was showing off the Old Gods expansion, which was new at the time. I acquired the game and got totally immersed into it without really understanding much at all that was going on, until I started watching some Arumba videos that more properly explained things. As a kid, I was happy to have my hand held by a YouTuber but of course, even with the help, it's not like I really understood much. It would be after hundreds of hours of playing that I started to understand things beyond just copying what the YouTubers were saying. EU5 is the exact same feel for me. I find myself discovering new things all the time and being excited by it. I uncover how some mechanic works, then start applying that knowledge in subsequent playthroughs, with each one being more successful because of it. My first Florence playthrough, I struggled to even form Tuscany at all, but by the 50 or so hour mark, I had conquered Genoa and Venice while being allied to Milan for protection from coalitions, and I did so around 1400. I was very proud of my progress, and EU5 really does make you feel proud of what you accomplished because it can be a tough game to crack. I think EU5 will be a very good game, however it'll take the willingness of its players to really shine. You have to be willing to accept that the game will be confusing and it will not make things easy to find. You have to be willing to look at all the numbers and understand things, or else I guess just wait for a YouTuber to explain it to you. It's hard to really say for sure, given my memories of first starting EU4 were A, in a very different era of the game, and B, well over 10 years ago, but I distinctly remember EU4 clicking much faster for me. Back then, provinces all had a base tax, and if you conquered the province with a high base tax, then you made more money. EU5 is just not so direct. Things in EU4 made sense relatively quickly to me, but EU5 has some of that Victoria 3 style learning arc. Success is easy to measure but hard to predict. In EU5, your nation's base tax is a solid measure of how well you're doing economically, and you even have a great power score which can sort of rank your overall strength. But how do you increase those things consistently? That takes a lot more work to figure out, because it's not just conquest. Anyway, my overall point with regards to EU5 is that it's a game which reminds me of CK2 and EU4 in the early days. This is not a casual game, and it's not a simple game, nor is it really all that complex at the same time. Once you figured it out, you figured it out, and you'll be relying on the different circumstances each nation has to keep the game fresh, which is very much so like EU4 before mission trees came out. CK2 is a game which looks complicated but more so just has an awful UI. EU5 kinda suffers from that weakness in its current state, but that could change for release. EU5, like Victoria 3, has problems with hidden information away in hard to find places, and that too is a weakness, but overall, I've been very happy with EU5, and I hope that what shortcomings it does have might get addressed for release. When the game comes out, I'll have a review video which will try to evaluate the game for its merits at release, and of course, my opinion will be colored by this early access experience, but I'll be able to levy all the full critiques and praises that I otherwise have if I could know that's what's coming in the final product. For all I know, much of what I've praised here will end up being removed for release, just as equally the things I dislike might be fixed. So if you don't like the vagueness of this impression video, then sorry, it's the nature of an early access style video. Anyway, if any Paradox devs are watching, by the way, I'll just say congratulations on this monumental game. No matter how many flaws are in it, the bones on this thing are solid, and it must have been a gargantuan effort. I hope that maybe you found something valuable in what I said here. Thank you for your time.
By the Lord's will, Spain sinks with the storm-imbued tide.
By the grace of God, you've done it.